Incredible mountain man discovers freezing Mustangs at his gate. His touching act transforms the fate of the community. Jim Tanner squinted through the blinding snow, his heart racing as he witnessed the wild Mustangs huddled against the biting wind. Their shaggy coats whipped in the storm, eyes wide with vulnerability. They embodied the very spirit of the freedom he cherished. And as the storm raged around him, a voice whispered in his mind, his father's voice, steeped in the values of compassion. He felt torn, standing at the precipice of a choice that weighed heavy, like the snow filling the valley. Every frigid gust that swept through the trees seemed to carry a chilling reminder of his family ranch's financial strain. And yet here were creatures in dire need of shelter. He hesitated for only a moment, fear gnawing at his insides. Was he being reckless? Should he risk the little he had left? But before he could unravel those thoughts further, instinct overtook reason. He rushed towards the herd with a determination that pulsed through him. As he opened the gate and beckoned the wild footloose spirits toward the warmth of his cabin, doubt began to assail him like the howling wind. He gritted his teeth, his work-bound hands trembling slightly, as he led the horses into the relative safety of his barn. But after a day spent offering warmth to the Mustangs, the bones of his solitude began to creak with a pressure both new and unnerving. As word traveled through the town, Jim could feel eyes upon him. The old rancher, Dan, accustomed to the traditions that had governed their lives for generations, showed up at his doorstep, framed by snow and fury. "What's this about you taking in strays, Tanner?" His voice was low and heavy with skepticism. "Strays?" "They were freezing," Jim replied, but even he questioned his own conviction. The dread of what it might mean hung low like fog. With Dan's blunt words echoing in his mind, he felt churned by conflicting emotions, compassion, wrestling with the fear that his actions, instead of being the right thing to do, could unravel the very fabric of the community he held dear. Days passed, and with them brought a flurry of mixed reactions. Neighbors whispered and scowled, polarizing perspectives igniting fights over Jim's good deed. Friends' faces twisted in a mix of gratitude and agitation as opinions clashed, and the town became a battlefield of familial expectations and individual benevolence. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Just as the currents of discourse swirled around him, a slick corporate entity emerged on the horizon. Grim-faced businessmen arrived, their intentions clear: capitalize on the chaos and claim Jim's land for their own profit. Fresh dread washed over him. They saw his kindness not as noble, but as an opportunity to seize. The weight of Jim's decision pressed down harder. His home, built over decades of toil, now hung in the balance. As icy wind clawed at the walls of his cabin, he faced an impossible choice: stand for what he believed in and risk everything, or retreat into self-preservation, leaving the Mustangs and the essence of his morality out to face the storm alone. Tension rippled through his core, gnawing at his resolve. He could feel the specter of impending dread, a storm formed not just from snow, but also from fractured trust among loved ones and lurking greed. Night engulfed the hills, and the howl of the storm intertwined with the roiling tempest in Jim's heart. Would his singular act of kindness be his undoing, or could it become the spark that ignited a different fight altogether? The silence fell, but it was heavy, threatening, unresolved, hanging in the frigid night air as he braced for the battles ahead. Jim awoke to a world transformed by dawn's light. The storm had dulled the landscape, draping it in a blanket of white that shone almost ethereally. Yet even amidst the beauty, shadows lingered, darker in Jim's mind than in the frigid world around him. He sought resolution, but the burdens he carried were heavy and complicated. The Mustangs, now sheltered, stood near the barn, peaceful yet emblematic of the turmoil brewing outside. They were safe, but reminded him daily of his precarious choice. As he filled their trough with hay, he felt resolutely anchored to them, a connection deepening beyond mere obligation. But for every moment of tranquility, Jim recognized the tempest brewing at the heart of his situation. The cold had not only settled in the valley, but also nestled within his heart as he pondered the ramifications of his good deed, a decision that seemed more reckless with each passing moment. Could compassion be a catalyst for catastrophe? The barn door creaked open, and the familiar, begrudging frame of Dan stood there, mistrust etched upon his weathered face. "Morning, Tanner," he said curtly, voice laced with the chill outside. "Heard the news about those Mustangs. People are talking." Jim clenched his jaw, aware of the web of whispers and judgments surrounding him. "I did what anyone would do," he replied, the conviction stirring yet faltering. Dan stepped in, his demeanor transforming from suspicion to something resembling concern. "But what about your land? How will this affect your ranch?" This question echoed his own internal battle. "I can't just stand by and let them freeze." The words spilled out before he could collar them. Dan crossed his arms. Skepticism returned. "You think that's all there is to it? You're waving a flag in front of a bull. Those corporate wolves are circling. They sense opportunity." Jim's thoughts darkened. The prospect of losing his ranch to greed was unbearable, but how could he abandon the Mustangs? As Dan continued, urging caution, Jim felt bits of resolve cracking under layers of worry and doubt. The day dragged, filled with small chores that felt increasingly insignificant. Each act of feeding and tending fueled the internal disarray. The Mustangs grazed, but gratitude flickered in their eyes, and beneath each glimmer, Jim felt a deepening conflict, a pull toward courage muddled with self-preservation. He longed to stand firm for them, but was acutely aware of the jeopardy his kindness cast upon his own future. Night descended again. The chill in the air penetrated deeper, mirroring the tremors in his heart. He found himself seated on the edge of his bed, mind racing. Did he possess the necessary strength for the fight that lay ahead? What if standing up for the Mustangs meant sacrificing everything he had built? Then, an idea flickered through his mind. Perhaps he could find allies amongst those who had supported him in the past. Those bonds had weathered storms too. Maybe they would rally again against the encroaching threat. Yet merely thinking of reaching out to others sent waves of hesitation crashing into his resolve. Could those who once scowled at him now rally alongside him? Tomorrow would be the crucible. He would either remain shackled by fear or free himself from its heavy grasp. Sleep evaded him as he battled restless uncertainty. But the Mustangs, with their wild spirit, lingered in his thoughts. They deserved a protector, and Jim would have to summon that inner warrior, armed not with steel, but with fierce compassion. As dawn approached once more, he sensed a shift in himself. The realization settled. The Mustangs had ignited something quietly dormant within him, a fire of purpose he had long forgotten. The time had come to formulate his plan, but a new fork loomed ahead. Would he risk everything for what he believed, or flee from the very identity he had crafted? The sun's first light crested the horizon, illuminating his path, but casting shadows full of unknowns. With the dawn's light spilling into his room, Jim stood once again at the intersection of action and indecision. He lingered just a moment longer, soaking in the familiar surroundings, the fading photographs lining the wall, tales of a life steeped in tradition, honor, and personal sacrifice. Breathing deeply, he shook off the heaviness that clung to him. The Mustangs awaited him, a reminder that strength thrived in wildness, not in captivity. Gathering his resolve, he slipped on his sturdy boots and walked to the barn with purpose, each step resonating like a heartbeat, louder than the doubts that trailed behind him. He had seen the lifelessness that greed could bring, having witnessed neighbors' lands converted into soulless stretches, devoid of the spirit that had once flourished. He couldn't succumb, not now, not when he had the chance to protect the wild freedom he cherished. With that thought, clarity washed over him, purging the morning haze. As he fed the Mustangs their morning hay, he pondered his new strategy. Reaching out to old friends was essential, but building alliances in a world rife with skepticism would require finesse and confidence. Maybe he could extend the narrative of his compassionate choice into a rallying cry instead of a conversation started with resignation. Yet, that apprehension pricked at the edges of his bravado. Were his connections too frayed? As he watched the Mustangs fight for position near the feed trough, he realized something profound. They embodied the spirit he needed to rediscover within himself. Full of untamed resolve, he inched closer to his unfolding plan. "Come on, Jim. You've got this," he whispered to himself, skepticism mingling with determination. He envisioned those he could reach out to. Maggie, a local vet known for her fierce loyalty to animal welfare. Eli, the rancher with a strong sense of morality. And even Sarah, who had once turned his old truck into a family heirloom, always believing in the good in people. He would start with them, one by one. Suddenly, a noise disrupted his thoughts, familiar but jarring. It was Dan again, showing up earlier than usual. This time, there was a different energy about him. As he stepped into the barn, the skepticism in his eyes seemed muted, replaced with what looked like reluctant admiration. "I see you're committed," Dan stated, leaning against a support beam, arms crossed, but no longer defensively. Jim locked eyes with him, feeling an unexpected wave of camaraderie. "I can't just turn away from them, Dan. I mean, look at them." He gestured toward the grazing Mustangs, their untamed beauty a stark contrast to the encroaching darkness looming outside. "It's not just about them. It's about this land and what we stand for." He felt alive, the words rolling off his tongue with newfound clarity. Dan nodded, slowly uncrossing his arms. "You're in deeper waters than you realize. Those corporate interests won't play fair. But if there are allies out there, I'm willing to listen." It was a small step, a crack in Dan's armor, and it ignited a spark within Jim. Perhaps there was room here for collaboration instead of division. As they discussed what Jim might say to Maggie and Eli, ideas began to flow, strategies woven from the threads of mutual respect and purpose. Hours passed, and when Dan left, it felt like a weight had lifted. Jim sensed a shift, not just in their conversation, but within himself. He was no longer a mere caretaker of the Mustangs. He was emerging as a protector, ready to challenge both fear and corporate takers. As the sun hung high, illuminating the struggles on the horizon, Jim felt invigorated. The Mustangs were stirring, eyes bright and wild. It was as if they sensed the change within him, an echo of their spirit. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the contacts he had to reach out to first. Would they stand with him against the corporate tide threatening everything he valued? The anxiety surged again as he contemplated the calls he would have to make, ready to face the very same judgments he had feared before. The moment had crystallized. It was not merely about saving the Mustangs. It was about owning the direction of his life, unshackling himself from the chains of doubt and fear. He took a step back, gazing at the Mustangs before him, feeling a surge of purpose. But just as he made to dial, an unfamiliar sound broke his concentration, an engine revving harshly in the distance. He glanced towards the road, the color draining from his face, as a convoy of trucks emerged around the bend, logos emblazoned, moving deliberately toward his property. This wasn't just an inconvenient turn of fate. It was the confrontation he had both anticipated and dreaded. The time had come to face what he had only prepared for in theory. Jim's heart pounded as the rumble of engines grew closer, reverberating in his chest like an ominous drumbeat. The trucks rolled in, tires crushing the gravel into dust, their imposing presence a stark contrast to the peacefulness of the barn. Each logo, plastered on the side, seemed to scream corporate dominance, a threatening silhouette against the sunlit horizon. Taking a deep breath, Jim stepped forward, determination coursing through him. He could no longer remain an observer in this battle. It was time to reclaim the narrative of his life. The Mustangs watched, their ears pricked, sensing the shift in the air. Behind him, Jim felt a surge of responsibility, not solely for the wild horses, but for himself. The first truck parked, and a tall man stepped out, his demeanor exuding authority. Jim recognized him. It was the lead representative from the corporation keen on buying his land. Mark's confident stride offered a direct challenge. "Jim, I trust you're ready to talk," he said, an unsettling smirk dancing on his lips. "Ready to talk?" Jim echoed, forcing his voice steady. "You've already decided my fate without even asking me. What's there to discuss?" Each word felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Mark's smile deepened, revealing a willingness to manipulate the narrative. "This isn't personal, Jim. Think of the opportunities this could open up for you. Financial stability, security, a small sacrifice for a larger reward." He glanced contemptuously at the Mustangs. "You can't protect them forever." Jim felt his resolve solidify. The Mustangs were not a burden. They were freedom incarnate, a key to what he had lost, his connection to purpose, his identity. "I won't sacrifice them for my comfort," he replied, grounding his words in an unexpected confidence. "They deserve better than a corporate cage." Mark's tone shifted slightly, annoyance flickering beneath his practiced facade. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jim. You think you can rally your friends against an entire corporation? They won't risk their livelihoods for a few horses." The sneer provoked something deep within Jim. He thought of Maggie's warmth, Eli's quiet strength, and Sarah's unyielding optimism. Their shared bonds were stronger than any fear Mark wielded. In that moment, he realized he could harness that energy to cultivate alliances, to mobilize resources, not as an angry rebel, but as a thoughtful leader, passionate about preserving the land. "Maybe I can't convince them all," Jim countered, his voice low and steady. "But I don't expect to do this alone. I'll fight for what's right. You make a mistake if you think this is just about the Mustangs." With each word, he felt the burden of doubt lifting, transforming into a tangible force. Mark's expression hardened, but Jim sensed a pivotal shift. There was a reluctant acknowledgement in the air, a recognition of Jim's newfound determination. "You'll need to be prepared for what comes next," Mark warned, turning away, tension rippling in the space between them. As the convoy drove away, Jim remained rooted in place, fired up by a surge of clarity. A plan began weaving itself in his mind, and with it, a sense of urgency propelled him forward. He picked up his phone and began dialing. Maggie answered first. Her supportive tone reinforced Jim's resolve. They talked of strategy, of rallying others who valued their land and animals above profit. Eli joined the conversation, and his steady voice tempered Jim's rising excitement. Jim was orchestrating something larger than himself, a unified stance against encroaching greed. After speaking with Sarah, Jim felt unstoppable. The Mustangs, wild and resilient, mirrored his steely determination. He opened the barn door, stepping out as the sun began to set, illuminating the horizon. This wasn't merely about Mustangs or land anymore. It was about reclaiming his identity and standing firm in his beliefs. But just as clarity solidified, a shadow loomed over the setting sun. Another truck appeared on the road, darker and more foreboding. Jim's stomach sank. Who could it be now? As it neared, the unmistakable insignia of a rival corporate faction came into focus. "Here we go," Jim muttered, adrenaline spiking. The stakes were escalating, and so would the conflict. Would he truly be ready to face them? This was only the beginning. Jim felt the weight of inevitability as the second truck rolled to a stop, its engine's low growl echoing in the stillness of the evening. The air grew thick with tension, a palpable reminder of the encroaching storm that threatened his entire existence. He clenched his fists, drawing on the sense of purpose that had ignited within him just moments before. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman dressed sharply in a tailored suit. Her presence commanded attention. She had the demeanor of someone who was powerful and well acquainted with intimidation. Jim recognized her instantly. Claire, the legal strategist for the rival corporation. Known for her ruthlessness, her ability to crush opposition with both charisma and coldness was legendary. "Jim," Claire said, her voice smooth yet laced with challenge. "I hope you're ready to make some real decisions," she continued, surveying the barn and the surrounding landscape with barely contained disdain. "This is a defining moment for you and the future of this land." "Defining moment?" Jim echoed, his voice steadier than he felt. "You mean a moment for you to push your corporate agenda forward?" She stepped closer, eyes piercing like a knife. "You're not naive enough to think you can withstand us on sheer will alone. Save the theatrics. It doesn't suit you." Jim felt his stomach clench, but fought the urge to back down. "And what suits me, Claire? Giving up everything I've worked for because it's easier for you?" "Easier?" Claire scoffed, folding her arms elegantly. "Life isn't about ease, it's about legacy. What will you leave behind? A couple of wild horses on a patch of land no one cares about?" Her words clenched at Jim's heart. He pictured his father's weathered hands, memories of childhood summers spent wandering the fields, running with the Mustangs racing through his mind. Jim squared his shoulders, pushing back against the growing doubt. "Those horses matter. They symbolize everything I've fought for, and they matter to this community." A flicker of interest crossed Claire's expression. "Community, you say? The way they'll drive by just to see the last remnants of an old world? You need to be smart about this. They won't stand up for you when push comes to shove." "Don't underestimate them or me," Jim said, each word grounding him further in his resolve. "I might surprise you. This isn't just about Mustangs. It's about standing up for what's right." Claire narrowed her eyes, her composure wavering for an instant. "Determination can lead to failure, Jim. Remember that. The choices you make now will dictate what your future will look like. A stranded dream can be a painful truth." Jim felt that tether of shared experience with the Mustangs. Wild, free, and unbroken, he chose to embrace the challenge rather than run from it. He had spent too long in the shadows, allowing others to dictate his life. What she called a stranded dream, he saw as a rallying cry for action. "I'll make my choices," he said firmly, "but I won't make them sitting idle, letting people like you decide for me." With her gaze unyielding, Claire stepped back. "We'll see if that stubbornness serves you well, Jim. Just know, the next time we meet, the stakes will be much higher." She turned, striding back to her truck, and Jim watched, his heart racing. As the truck disappeared down the road, the weight of her words sank in. The stakes were indeed raising around him, but with that knowledge, a new fire ignited. He needed to draw on his strengths more than ever. There were resources and allies to gather. The Mustangs weren't just his responsibility. They were the manifestation of everything he needed to reclaim in his life. But the realization also struck. He hadn't yet grappled with the darker sides of this fight. Where could his own fears lead him? Jim stood alone at the edge of his life's crossroads, feeling the cold bite of fear and determination blend within him. He needed a plan, not just for the Mustangs and the land, but to face his growing anxiety about what all this conflict might reveal about himself. Would he crumble under the pressure, or would he rise from the ashes stronger than before? He took a deep breath, holding on to the resolve igniting within. There was much to do, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. But Jim had unearthed something important, his own strength. And the time had come to face the complex choices that awaited him. With a renewed sense of urgency, he reached for his phone again, but this time it was to search out more than allies. It was to delve deeper into the landscape of his own courage. Time to prepare, he whispered to himself. There's something more at stake here than I realized. As he started to enter names into his contacts, he began to wonder who truly held the power. Him, or those who tried to snatch it away. Would he unlock a part of himself, yet undiscovered as the final confrontation drew near? Jim sat at his desk, tension coiling in his stomach, like a tightly wound spring. The gentle hum of his old phone grazed against the backdrop of his unease. Did he really have the right people in his corner? Or was he merely racing against the current, as Claire had so ruthlessly suggested? He recalled her words about legacy and how they pierced through his defenses. The idea that he could end up leaving behind a dismal monument to loss gnawed at him. He typed in a few names, feeling the weight of each click pressing on his consciousness. He had to act strategically, not just impulsively or emotionally. Jim remembered the few allies he had successfully forged connections with over the years. There was Sarah, the local historian, who had an encyclopedic knowledge of the region and a passion that rivaled his own. Then there was Mark, a seasoned attorney who had fought for land rights before. Maybe they could help him craft a plan to fight against Claire's corporation. His thumb hovered over the call button, doubt creeping in as he hesitated. Was he placating himself with half-hearted hopes, or was this a legitimate effort to take a stand? Breathe, he reminded himself. Every great endeavor begins with a step. With a steadying inhale, he pressed down, summoning Sarah's voice through the receiver. After a few minutes of passionate dialogue, Sarah's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Jim, this is crucial. The Mustangs aren't just a niche part of our culture. They're a thread in the fabric of this region. With the right campaign, we could make it known that it's not just about saving them. It's about preserving our heritage. A flicker of hope filled Jim's chest. Exactly. But what's the angle? He asked, his mind racing with possibilities. The last thing we can afford is to seem sentimental. We need to strike a chord with practicality and emotion, balancing the two. She chuckled softly, but he could tell it was laced with camaraderie. You can start with the community. They may surprise you if you approach them honestly. People here might want to protect that legacy too, not just for the horses, but for what it represents. Jim felt a surge of elation at the prospect. An opportunity that had once seemed distant now lay tantalizingly close. As they continued brainstorming, he felt that hidden part of himself begin to unfurl. But doubt began to cloud the moment. Could he truly lead others into a fight they might not be ready for? Or would he unwittingly drag them into a defeat weighed down by his insecurities? Each question continually circled his thoughts as Sarah and he exchanged ideas to amplify the Mustang's plight into something larger, something resonant. This is about heritage, Jim, and you need to step into this role wholeheartedly, she insisted. It's in you. You've got the spirit to be the face of this. You've known what it means to fight for something you believe in, haven't you? Her words sent tremors through his being. Could he channel this doubt into a compelling narrative? A sense of courage coiled within him, and he found himself more resonating with her words than ever before. They agreed to meet again soon to strategize further. The dialogue had ignited a flicker of inspiration, imbuing him with renewed strength. But as the call ended and he hung up, the grave reality of this journey still loomed. He hadn't yet faced the avalanche of his own fears. He might have allies now, but did he truly believe in himself enough to confront Claire and her relentless ambition? Staring out at the verdant fields where the wild horses roamed, a deep breath steadied him, fortifying the determination that now crackled in rural air like a storm waiting to break. The Mustangs were not merely symbols. They represented a deeper struggle fostering within him. Would he rise above the insecurity within him, or allow it to define him once more? The next day would require him to delve deeper into not just his narrative, but into his very spirit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the moment of truth began to dawn on him. The landscape around him whispered of an impending change. The time had come to turn the page. Would he embrace the mantle of leadership, or would he let fear tether him to the past? The morning light spilled across Jim's desk, illuminating the clutter of papers and notes he had gathered for his strategy session with Sarah. Each piece carried the weight of potential, yet the echo of doubt still lingered in the corners of his mind, like shadows refusing to retreat. He sat, staring at his reflection in the window, watching the distant Mustangs gallop freely under the sky. They were symbols of resilience, and he needed to embody that same spirit. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to focus on his plan. The first step was clear: connecting with the community. Would they resonate with his story? As he made his way to the local diner, an informal hub of chatter, his thoughts were interrupted by memories. Vivid impressions of his father telling tales around a campfire about the land and its fierce beauty flooded back. Those stories were the foundation of his connection to this place, and now they felt like the very core of what he needed to communicate. The bell above the diner door jingled as he entered, and he felt a wavering sense of anxiety wash over him. Jim scanned the room and spotted familiar faces, old friends and acquaintances. He took a seat at the counter, his heart racing as he summoned the courage to initiate conversations. Sarah had been right. Honesty would be his strongest ally. "Hey, Jim, what's got you looking so serious?" Tom, a local rancher, asked as he poured him a cup of coffee. Jim took a cautious sip, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. It was time to share his heart. "I've been thinking a lot about the Mustangs, what they mean to all of us here. I'm planning on starting a campaign to raise awareness about their plight against the development plans Claire is proposing." Tom raised an eyebrow and leaned in closer. "You really think that'll make a difference?" Steeling himself, Jim nodded. "It has to. I believe if we all see how much they symbolize our heritage, we can stand together. The Mustangs reflect our spirit. I want to gather our stories and build a narrative that engages everyone. Make it personal." The conversation continued, and Jim found himself sharing anecdotes and weaving tales that connected their history with the current urgency surrounding the Mustangs. Each word felt like a brick, laying a foundation beneath him, yet doubt prickled at the edges of his newfound confidence. Would this approach galvanize them, or would it fall flat? Over the next few days, he made the rounds, talking to farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers, each story building momentum and breathing life into his cause. But he noticed certain hesitations. Some were eager, but a few expressed doubts, questioning whether fighting against Claire was worth the effort. Those moments of pushback cultivated a deeper insecurity within him. What if they were right? What if he led them into a futile struggle that only sowed discord? He pushed the gnawing doubts aside and focused on tangible steps. When he met with Sarah again, they reviewed each possibility meticulously. "You're unearthing something powerful," Sarah noted. "Every event you hold can highlight the intersection of our heritage and the Mustang's survival. It'll remind everyone why they matter." Yet as he left her office that afternoon, a disquieting thought surfaced. He had done well in connecting, but was it authentic enough? Was he genuinely inspiring them, or merely grooming them to echo his own quiet fears? The pressure of leadership weighed heavily on him. That night, unable to sleep, Jim transitioned into restless pondering. The familiar sounds of the wild horses echoed in him, mingling with memories of his father's voice, a constant reminder of purpose, yet also a challenge. He sat up, gripping the edge of his bed with a burning resolve. Tomorrow was the day he would take a real stand, not just for the Mustangs, but for the leader he was beginning to embrace. As dawn approached, a sudden realization hit him. This was no longer just about the Mustangs or the land. It was about carving an identity and legacy that mattered, a fight he had accepted wholly. He would have to confront Claire not as a coward, but as someone who had unearthed his own sense of worth. The moment of confrontation approached like a storm brewing on the horizon, and Jim felt the charge of anticipation under his skin. Would he find the strength to fight, or would he shrink back into the shadows once more? The sun rose over the horizon, its rays casting an amber glow across Jim's face. The anticipation mingled with the crisp morning air, igniting a fire in his chest. He felt the weight of responsibility, a mantle he was starting to accept. He dressed with purpose, the fabric of his worn shirt brushed snugly against his skin, a reminder of his roots and the life he was advocating for. Jim's determination served as both a shield and a sword as he drove toward Claire's office, the tires crunching over gravel with a steadfast rhythm. His palms were sweaty against the steering wheel. Each mile brought him closer to a confrontation that would require every ounce of courage he had been cultivating. The doubt that had previously taunted him in the dark corners of his mind began to dissipate in the sunlight. At Claire's office, he paused. Outside, the Mustangs were grazing peacefully, oblivious to the human conflicts playing out near them. They embodied strength and grace. A defining moment swirled in his thoughts, and he sensed their silent encouragement urging him forward. Today was not just about the land or the Mustangs. It was a declaration of his own resilience. He opened the door and stepped inside. Claire looked up from her desk, surprise brushing her features. "Jim, what a pleasant surprise," she said, her tone measured. Her lack of enthusiasm only bolstered his resolve. He nodded curtly, weighing his words. "Thanks for meeting with me, Claire. I wanted to talk about the development plan." He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the tidal wave of emotions that rushed to the surface. "I don't think it's right to ignore the impact it has, especially on the Mustangs." Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know we need to make progress, Jim. The land needs to evolve, and so do the people. Evolve or erase." The words slipped out harsher than intended. He softened his tone, fighting the fiery spark within. "This isn't merely a development issue. It's about our shared legacy, our identity. The Mustangs symbolize that, and I would hope you can see that too." Claire's expression hardened. "Jim, idealism won't pay our bills. This isn't a fairy tale. It's business." The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around them both like a storm cloud, darkening the room. Jim's heart raced, but surprisingly, he felt a surge of clarity. This was not an oppression. This was an opportunity to share authentic stories, the very essence that could sway perceptions, even hers. With each assertion, his voice steadied. "It is business, but it can also be conscious business. Claire, people care about the Mustangs. They are part of what makes this community unique. I've spoken to many, farmers, ranchers, everyday people, and they fear losing this part of themselves. Let's find a way to balance progress with preservation." Eyes narrowed, her expression tempered into one of contemplation. The clash of the two perspectives simmered just beneath the surface, and for the first time Jim saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Was it possible that beneath her business-minded facade lay the potential for understanding? Just as he believed she might be swayed, Claire leaned back in her chair, her guard returning firmly. "You're passionate, But you're also naive if you think stories and nostalgia can change the hard realities of economics. Jim felt a pang of frustration claw at him, but he held on to the conviction that had propelled him into this conversation. Sometimes, Claire, economics can change when enough people stand behind a story strong enough to remind them what really matters. I'm willing to lead that charge, but I can't do it alone. As the silence settled between them, he realized this was the pivotal moment he had sought. It was more than confronting Claire. It was about standing up for the future he envisioned, not just for the Mustangs, but for the entire community. Eager yet anxious, he pressed further. Let's collaborate, instead of collide. Allow the people's voices to inform the project. They could reveal a harmonious approach for everyone. Claire regarded him through narrowed eyes, weighing his proposal as if it were a precarious balance beam. In that heartbeat of uncertainty, Jim sensed a crisis point, one that could pivot him deeper into leadership or send him spiraling back into doubt. Would she accept his offer of collaboration, or would he watch in dismay as she walked away with disregard for the sentiments he so fervently expressed? In that charged moment, Jim realized he was no longer just fighting for the Mustangs. He was fighting for himself, too. The stakes had never been clearer, and he felt the horizon of his future stretch before him, uncharted but vividly alive. As Claire opened her mouth to speak, Jim's pulse quickened. Would this be the breakthrough he needed? Or was he prepared to walk away from confrontation, knowing he had tried? Claire hesitated, her lips parted, yet the words didn't flow. Jim's heartbeat raced, an urgent drum roll in contrast to the stillness filling the office. He could almost see the thoughts swirling behind her guarded gaze, a tempest of intention and apprehension. What if we let the people weigh in? A series of town meetings or forums? He suggested, desperate for her to see the potential for a narrative shift. It could build community trust and involvement. The project's sustainability could hinge on a partnership with the very people it would affect. Her expression remained unreadable, but he noticed the faintest twitch of her brow. It was a portal into her inner conflict. Jim leaned forward slightly, instinct urging him to bridge that emotional gap. Consider this, Claire. The community needs to feel that they have a stake in their future. Not just the land, but their identity too. If progress must happen, let's carve a path that reflects both development and heritage. A flash of frustration sparked in her eyes. And if no one agrees with your vision? What then? Your dream will still remain in the shadows, just like these Mustangs you adore. Her challenge felt like a lightning bolt, direct and striking. Jim took a breath, steadying himself where his resolve met the serrated edge of doubt. If that happens, I need to be comfortable with the outcome. But if I don't engage, I'll let the fear of failure dictate my silence. I won't allow that. An unexpected wave of vulnerability washed over him. In that moment, he understood that standing up for his beliefs was not solely about the Mustangs or the landscape. It was about owning his voice, something he had often muted in the face of opposition. He dropped his gaze momentarily, reflecting on the quiet strength he'd seen in the Mustangs, wild and unyielding. He imagined the power that came from being true to oneself, even when it felt easier to shrink back. I won't regret the attempt, he said resolutely, meeting Claire's gaze again, this time with more intensity. The silence cradled the space between them like a tense elastic band, poised to snap either way. Jim's heart raced with the realization that this was not merely business. It was personal evolution. His desire to advocate for those who couldn't speak was colliding with the awakening responsibility he felt towards his own voice. Perhaps, Claire murmured, her tone shifting ever so slightly. Your perspective could present a valuable narrative, if only we could find a way to sell it. The breakthrough felt fragile, like a new seed beginning to push through the soil, fighting for sunlight. Her tentative acceptance ignited a flicker of hope within him, but still the gauntlet was lit by the embers of uncertainty. This was just the beginning. "Let's explore it together," he spoke, offering a hand as if to bridge the gap between professional obligation and shared vision. "I can gather stories, real ones. Bring those voices to the table. They deserve to be heard." Claire shifted in her chair, a storm of decisions swirling around her. The prospect of her own compromise flickered, but it was an uneasy dance. "I'll think about it, Jim. But remember," she warned, "change is never swift, and your idealism can be a heavy anchor." A mix of excitement and anxiety coursed through him as he stood to leave. "I get it," he said earnestly, aware of the uphill climb still ahead. "But I believe true evolution begins at that intersection of passion and willingness to change. Even an anchor can be lifted with enough momentum." Jim stepped back into the bright afternoon light, his heart pounding with the possibilities that lay ahead. He felt a surge of energy, a sense of ownership over a future that was growing clearer, even as the path remained obscured. As he turned back to the Mustangs grazing in the distance, he sensed they watched him like guardians of a heritage too precious to lose. In that moment, clarity crystallized in his mind. He was not just fighting for the Mustangs anymore, he was fighting to belong. But tomorrow loomed with the weight of uncertainty. Would he find the courage to present this idea to the community? Could he rally their voices to forge a united front? As he set off down the road, he knew one thing for certain. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the true test of his newfound leadership awaited. Would he rise to that challenge? The days that followed felt like a convergence of time and emotion, a whirlwind of progress driven by the rallying whispers of the community. Jim Tanner stood at the center of a growing movement, each day proving to be a defining chapter in his journey from a solitary caretaker to an advocate for both the Mustangs and the values they represented. The town meetings, once a daunting thought, had sparked an electrifying energy among people who felt unheard. The call to action resonated within the hearts of many. Each individual, from the sturdy farmers to the spirited townsfolk, began to share their stories of the land and its intertwined heritage with the wild horses. Jim felt their collective narratives weave a tapestry of identity that no corporation could erase. He had found a voice, not only his own, but that of the entire community, brimming with purpose and resolve. With Sarah and Eli beside him, they formed a coalition, strategizing how to channel this momentum into a comprehensive campaign. They organized rallies, created a social media platform, and infused the townspeople's voices into a rallying cry that echoed for what they believed. A vision of preservation over profit. The Mustangs became the beating heart of their story, serving as a potent symbol of resistance against the encroaching greed. Amidst the tumult, he discovered a newfound confidence, not merely in his leadership, but in who he was becoming. Jim was no longer haunted by the fear of failure. This transformation propelled him forward, invigorating his spirit and aligning his desires with actions. He learned to balance self-assurance with humility, realizing that this fight was not about personal glorification, but rather about standing firm for ideals larger than himself. Then came the fateful day of the final town hall meeting, a definitive moment he had prepared relentlessly for. The room buzzed with a mix of anticipation and anxiety as townsfolk gathered, their faces illuminated by flickering hopes for the future. As Jim stepped up to the podium, he felt the weight of their gazes upon him, an electrifying current of trust and expectation. "Today, we stand united," he began, his voice steady, resonating with the pulse of the community. "United for our land, for our heritage, and for the Mustangs who symbolize our fight. We are not just a collection of individuals. We are a living testament to the legacy our ancestors built. This land is our home, and its spirit resides in each one of us." He wove through personal anecdotes that resonated with the audience. Stories of childhood exploration, the wild Mustangs racing through golden fields, and his late father's whispers about honor and legacy. Every story reinforced the connection between heart and heritage, igniting the room with passionate energy. Jim could feel the walls of doubt falling behind him, replaced with fiery conviction. As he laid out their plan, a proposal that leveraged community stories to present an irrefutable case against the corporate developments, he caught glimpses of hope in faces that had once been indifferent. Jim's words bridged a gap far deeper than property lines. They sought the very essence of who they were as individuals within a collective. The reactions from the crowd were electric. Hands shot up in support, voices echoed encouragement, and finally, a palpable shift took hold, igniting a collective commitment. The momentum shifted decidedly in their favor. Days later, as they presented their case to the corporate representatives, Jim felt a profound sense of accomplishment swell within. The boardroom, filled with well-suited executives, had transformed from a realm of intimidation to an arena of opportunity. With every assertive word he spoke, he recognized that he wasn't just fighting for the horses. He had become the embodiment of their spirit. Through the vibrant discussions and passionate appeals, change began to unfold. The Mustangs would not be erased. They would be celebrated as the symbols of his community's resilience. That was a victory greater than Jim had ever envisioned. In the aftermath of the negotiations, when the decision to preserve the land was announced, Jim Tanner found solace in the wild horses frolicking in the fields once more. He had labored not just for their preservation, but for the recognition of his own ability to effect change. As he watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the Mustangs, Jim felt a profound sense of clarity sweep over him. He no longer questioned his worth. He had proven not only to others, but to himself, that he was capable, courageous, and a true steward of the land he cherished. Each Mustang stood as a reflection of his own journey, wild, free, and fiercely resilient. And he knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning of many more values and stories waiting to be told. Today, he had conquered the fear that once loomed over him like a fog. Jim Tanner had emerged not just as a protector of the Mustangs, but as a confident leader ready to shape his life and community for years to come. This is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a real difference. Comment your reactions and theories about this powerful ending. What did Jim's journey mean to you? And share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this inspiring conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread the message of overcoming adversity.